Some people spend their lives building communities. Others spend their lives trying to control them. For nearly 8 years, Emily Carter had lived in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maple Grove. It was the kind of place where children rode bicycles until sunset, neighbors exchanged holiday cookies, and families gathered in parks during summer evenings. To outsiders, it looked like the perfect community. For Emily, it had once felt that way too. As a single mother raising 2 children, 12-year-old Mason and 9-year-old Lily, she had worked hard to create a stable and loving home. She balanced a demanding career in education with the endless responsibilities of parenthood. Every morning started before sunrise, and every evening ended long after her children were asleep. Yet, despite the challenges, she never complained. Her children were her greatest accomplishment. Mason was thoughtful and intelligent, the type of child who always stood up for classmates being bullied. Lily possessed endless curiosity and energy, bringing life wherever she went. They weren't perfect children, but they were kind. And kindness was something Emily valued more than perfection. Unfortunately, not everyone shared her values. At the center of nearly every neighborhood conflict stood one woman, Patricia Reynolds. Most residents knew her by another name. Karen Patricia had lived in Maple Grove longer than almost anyone else. She chaired neighborhood committees, organized homeowner meetings, monitored social media groups, and somehow managed to involve herself in every decision affecting the community. At first glance, she appeared helpful. Underneath the surface, however, many neighbors had learned an uncomfortable truth. Patricia didn't want a community, she wanted control. Over the years, residents had quietly endured her constant complaints. She criticized landscaping choices, monitored children's activities, reported harmless violations, and frequently attempted to impose unofficial rules that existed nowhere except in her imagination. Many people disliked her behavior, few challenged. It most found it easier to stay silent. Emily was one of those people, at least initially. That changed one spring afternoon. The neighborhood park sat only a few blocks from Emily's home. After school, dozens of children gathered there to play basketball, ride scooters, and enjoy the last few hours of daylight. Mason and Lily loved spending time there. One afternoon, Emily arrived to pick them up and noticed something unusual. Several children stood awkwardly near the playground entrance. Parents were gathered nearby, speaking in hushed voices. The atmosphere felt tense, confused. Emily approached one of the mothers she knew. What she learned left her stunned. Patricia had spent the previous week filing complaints about multiple children in the neighborhood. She claimed they were creating excessive noise. She claimed they damaged community property. She claimed they made elderly residents uncomfortable. Most shocking of all, she had created a petition demanding restrictions on certain children using neighborhood facilities. The list included Mason and Lily. Emily couldn't believe it. Her children had never received disciplinary complaints from school. They volunteered. During community events, they respected adults. Yet somehow, they had become targets as Emily reviewed the petition. A deeper concern emerged. Nearly every child named belonged to families Patricia disliked. The pattern was impossible to ignore. This wasn't about behavior. This was personal. The following days became increasingly uncomfortable. Patricia's campaign spread throughout the neighborhood. She posted lengthy messages online. She circulated rumors. She exaggerated minor incidents. Each story portrayed the targeted children as disruptive troublemakers. The truth mattered less than the narrative she was creating. Unfortunately, narratives have power, especially when repeated often enough. Soon, some residents began questioning whether restrictions might be necessary. Others remained silent. Unwilling to become involved, Emily watched with growing frustration. What disturbed Her most wasn't the attacks against her children, it was the impact those attacks were having. Mason became quieter. The confident boy who once loved spending time with friends started spending more afternoons indoors. Lily began asking difficult questions. Questions no child should have to ask, questions about why certain adults disliked her, questions about what she had done wrong, questions that broke Emily's heart because Lily had done nothing wrong. Neither of them had. Yet they were learning a painful lesson many adults never forget. Sometimes people target others simply because they can. For Emily, that realization marked a turning point. She had spent years avoiding neighborhood drama. She preferred solving problems through patience and understanding. But when someone deliberately targeted her children, patience became much harder. Still, she resisted acting emotionally. Years working in education had taught her something important. Facts matter, evidence matters, truth matters. So instead of arguing publicly, she began observing. She documented complaints. She saved online posts. She collected records. The more information she gathered, the clearer the situation became. Patricia's accusations rarely matched reality. Many alleged incidents never occurred. Others were wildly exaggerated. Some involved entirely different children. Yet Patricia continued presenting speculation as fact. Meanwhile, Emily noticed something else. The same behavior she condemned in certain children was ignored when committed by others. Rules seemed to apply selectively. Fairness had disappeared. One evening, while reviewing neighborhood messages, Emily discovered something particularly troubling. Patricia had contacted several community organizations requesting formal restrictions on specific children, not just park access. Community events, youth activities, volunteer programs. It was a coordinated effort. She wasn't simply complaining. She was attempting to isolate children from opportunities. Emily felt anger rising inside her, not because Patricia disliked her. That was irrelevant, but because children were being punished based on personal grudges. No responsible adult should weaponize community resources against families. Yet Patricia appeared determined to do exactly that. Over the next month, tensions escalated. Parents began choosing sides. Some supported Patricia. Many privately disagreed but feared confrontation. Others openly defended the targeted families. The neighborhood became divided. Children noticed families noticed the sense of community slowly eroded. Patricia, however, seemed energized by the conflict. She attended every meeting, submitted every complaint, expanded every accusation. The more attention she received, the more aggressive her behavior became. Then came the announcement that changed everything. The local school district planned to create a new community advisory partnership between schools and neighborhood organizations. The initiative aimed to strengthen cooperation between educators, families, and community leaders. Several public representatives would participate. Patricia immediately viewed it as another opportunity for influence. She began telling neighbors she intended to secure a leadership position within the program. According to Patricia, she was uniquely qualified to represent community interests. Many residents quietly rolled their eyes. Few challenged her directly. Emily paid close attention, not because she wanted the position herself, but because she understood something. Patricia DIDN single quotes, THN single quotes, responsibility, and responsibility requires accountability. As weeks passed, Patricia's behavior grew increasingly bold. She spoke as though authority already belonged to her. She referred to targeted children as community problems. She suggested additional restrictions. She implied schools should monitor certain families more closely. Every statement revealed the same underlying belief: She genuinely thought she had the right to decide which children belonged. Emily listened carefully, observed quietly, collected facts, and waited. Because, unlike Patricia, she understood the importance of timing. The truth has a way of emerging when people least expect it. What Patricia didn't know was that Emily possessed experience, qualifications, and connections far beyond anything visible within the neighborhood. For years, she had dedicated herself to improving educational opportunities throughout the district. She served on committees, advised policy initiatives, worked alongside administrators. Most residents had no idea. Emily rarely discussed her professional accomplishments. She preferred letting actions speak for themselves. Patricia had mistaken humility for weakness. It was a mistake she would soon regret, because while Patricia spent months trying to push children out of community spaces, a much larger decision was quietly unfolding behind the scenes. A decision that would place authority exactly where Patricia least wanted it. And when that moment arrived, the woman who believed she controlled everyone else's future would discover a shocking truth. The mother she had spent months attacking wasn't just another neighbor. She was about to become the most influential voice in the entire district, and Patricia had no idea what was coming. The summer that followed felt unusually tense in Maple Grove. What had once been a peaceful neighborhood now carried an undercurrent of division. Residents still waved politely when passing one another, children still rode bicycles through familiar streets, and families still gathered for weekend activities. Yet beneath the surface, something had changed. Trust had begun to erode, and much of that tension centered around Patricia Reynolds. After months of campaigning against certain families and children, Patricia had grown increasingly confident. She spoke with the certainty of someone who believed she held authority over everyone around her, every community meeting became another stage. Every online discussion became another opportunity. Every neighborhood event became another platform from which she could promote her version of reality. Unfortunately, some people listened. Patricia had mastered a strategy that often works surprisingly well. She repeated accusations, frequently enough that some residents eventually accepted them without questioning their accuracy. She portrayed herself as a concerned community advocate. She framed criticism as protection. She disguised personal grudges as civic responsibility. And for a while, it worked. Meanwhile, Emily Carter remained largely silent to many neighbors. Her silence appeared passive. Some assumed she felt intimidated. Others believed she had simply accepted the situation. Patricia certainly thought so, from Patricia's perspective. Her campaign had succeeded. The targeted families seemed less vocal. Several children spent less time at community facilities. Many residents avoided confrontation altogether. Everything appeared to be moving in her favor. What she failed to realize was that Emily wasn't retreating. She was preparing. Years of experience in educational leadership had taught Emily an important lesson. Impulsive reactions rarely solve complex problems. Facts do, evidence does, professionalism does, and most importantly, patience does. While Patricia focused on public appearances, Emily focused on documentation. She maintained records of complaints. She archived social media posts. She saved emails. She collected statements from parents. She organized timelines. What emerged was a remarkably consistent pattern. Patricia's actions weren't random, they were targeted. The same families appeared repeatedly. The same children appeared repeatedly. The same accusations appeared repeatedly. Yet evidence supporting those accusations was often missing by the end of summer. Emily possessed a clear picture of what had been happening. The question was no longer whether Patricia was abusing her influence. The question was how long she could continue doing so before facing consequences. That answer arrived sooner than expected. One August morning, a district-wide announcement generated considerable attention. After months of evaluations, interviews, and recommendations, the local education board had completed leadership appointments for the upcoming academic year. The announcement included several positions. Most residents paid little attention. One appointment, however, would soon become impossible to ignore. Emily Carter had been selected as chair of the school board. The news spread quickly throughout educational circles. Administrators congratulated her. Teachers celebrated. Community leaders expressed support for many people within the district. The appointment felt natural. Emily had spent years earning respect through dedication, integrity, and service. The position reflected a career built on competence. Within Maple Grove, however, the reaction was very different. Most neighbors had no idea Emily had been involved in district leadership. They knew her as a hardworking mother, a friendly neighbor, a volunteer, a parent. Few understood the scope of her professional responsibilities. The announcement stunned them. Parents began sharing the news. Community groups discussed it, neighborhood. Social media pages buzzed with conversation. People who had barely noticed. Emily suddenly realized they had been living beside one of the most respected educational leaders in the district. Patricia learned about the appointment later that afternoon. At first, she refused to believe it. She assumed there had been some mistake. After all, the image she had constructed of Emily didn't fit reality in Patricia's mind. Emily was supposed to be an ordinary single mother struggling to keep up. Not a highly respected educational leader. Not someone overseeing district policy. Certainly not someone with authority, extending far beyond neighborhood boundaries, but facts have a way of surviving denial. And the facts were undeniable. Emily was now chair of the school board. For the first time in months, Patricia found herself feeling something unfamiliar. Unease, not because Emily had threatened her. Emily never did. Not because Emily sought revenge. She didn't. The discomfort came from something else entirely. Patricia suddenly realized she knew very little about the woman she had been targeting. That realization unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Meanwhile, Emily approached her new responsibilities exactly as she always had, with professionalism, with humility, and with a focus on serving students. The school year began smoothly. District initiatives moved forward. Programs expanded, community partnerships strengthened. Parents praised improvements in communication and transparency. Under Emily's leadership, trust grew. People felt heard. People felt respected. People felt included. Everything Patricia claimed to value was actually being achieved, just not by her, as months passed. The contrast became increasingly obvious. Emily built cooperation. Patricia created conflict. Emily encouraged participation. Patricia encouraged division. Emily focused on solutions. Patricia focused on complaints. Neighbors noticed. Parents noticed. Teachers noticed. The difference became impossible to ignore. Yet Patricia refused to change. Instead, she doubled down. Unable to accept the shifting perception within the community, she intensified her efforts. She continued filing complaints. She continued spreading rumors. She continued portraying herself as a victim whenever challenged. But something important had changed. People were no longer accepting her claims. Automatically, questions emerged. Evidence was requested. Facts were examined, and without unquestioned support, Patricia's accusations lost much of their power. The situation reached a turning point. During preparations for the district's annual Community Partnership Forum, the event brought together educators, parents, community leaders, and neighborhood representatives. Attendance was substantial every year. This year promised to be even larger. As school board chair, Emily would deliver the keynote presentation. The forum represented one of the district's most visible public events. Patricia immediately viewed it as an opportunity. She submitted an application to represent Maple Grove as a community advocate. Given her history of involvement, organizers approved her participation. Patricia interpreted the approval as validation. She believed the forum would strengthen her influence. She imagined presenting herself as the voice of responsible citizens. She envisioned gaining recognition from district leadership. Most importantly, she expected to stand alongside important decision-makers. What she didn't understand was that district leaders already knew exactly who Emily Carter was, and many of them also knew far more about Patricia's recent activities than she realized. The educational community was surprisingly interconnected. Stories traveled, concerns were shared, patterns became visible. Over the previous year, several parents had contacted district offices regarding community issues. Some of those reports involved Patricia. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, but enough to establish a reputation. A reputation Patricia never knew existed. As the forum approached, anticipation grew. Hundreds registered to attend. Community organizations prepared exhibits. Schools organized presentations. Volunteers coordinated logistics. For Emily, it represented another opportunity to strengthen relationships between families and schools. For Patricia, it represented a chance to reclaim attention. Neither woman realized how significant the event would become. Because beneath the polished schedules and professional presentations, a collision course was forming. Months of tension, months of accusations, months of assumptions. Everything was moving toward a moment neither could avoid. A moment when perception would collide with reality. A moment when the community would see both women standing under the same spotlight. One motivated by service, the other motivated by control. And once that comparison became visible, Maple Grove would never look at Patricia Reynolds the same way again. The forum was only days away. The invitations had been sent. The agenda had been finalized. The stage had been prepared. And for the first time, Patricia was about to enter a room where influence could not be manufactured through rumors or neighborhood gossip. She was about to enter a room where credibility had to be earned. What happened there would change everything. The Community Partnership Forum arrived on a crisp autumn morning, long before the official opening. Families, educators, community leaders, and volunteers began filling the convention center. Registration tables buzzed with activity. School representatives arranged displays showcasing student achievements. Parents gathered around informational booths. Teachers exchanged ideas about upcoming programs. The atmosphere reflected everything. Emily Carter believed a community should be inclusive, collaborative, supportive people from different backgrounds came together with a shared purpose: helping children succeed. As school board chair, Emily arrived early. She moved through the venue greeting volunteers, thanking organizers, and checking final preparations. Staff members welcomed her warmly. Administrators sought her input. Community leaders approached her with updates and ideas that the interactions were natural and genuine. Respect had not been created overnight, it had been earned over years of service. Across the venue, Patricia Reynolds entered with very different expectations. She had spent days preparing. She selected an outfit intended to project authority. She rehearsed its talking points. She imagined conversations with district officials. Most of all, she envisioned being recognized as an influential community representative for months. She had convinced herself that she was the true guardian of neighborhood standards. Today, she expected others to recognize that role. At first, everything seemed promising. Patricia checked in and received her credentials. She greeted several attendees. She positioned herself near visible areas where influential people might pass. Yet something felt different. The recognition she expected never arrived. While district leaders acknowledged her politely, their attention remained focused elsewhere. Specifically, It remained focused on Emily. Throughout the morning, Patricia watched a pattern unfold. When educational professionals entered the venue, they sought Emily. When community leaders had questions, they approached Emily. When media representatives requested interviews, they requested Emily again and again. The same reality presented itself. Emily wasn't simply participating in the event, she was leading it. The realization became increasingly difficult to ignore for years. Patricia had assumed influence came from being the loudest voice in a room. Today she was witnessing something entirely different. Real influence required trust, and trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned. The keynote presentation began. Shortly before noon, hundreds of attendees filled the auditorium. Parents sat beside teachers, community volunteers sat beside administrators, students sat beside local leaders. Everyone waited as Emily approached the stage. Patricia sat several rows from the front. Her expression remained carefully neutral. Inside, however, frustration continued growing. The applause that greeted Emily was impossible to miss. It wasn't polite, it wasn't obligatory. It was sincere. Emily's presentation focused on educational opportunity, community involvement, and student success. She spoke about partnership rather than control, responsibility rather than blame, solutions rather than complaints. The audience responded enthusiastically. Parents nodded in agreement. Teachers applauded key points. Volunteers expressed support. Throughout the speech, one theme remained consistent. Communities thrive when people lift each other up. They fail when people tear each other down. Although Emily never mentioned Patricia directly, the contrast felt unmistakable. Many attendees recognized it immediately after the presentation concluded. The standing ovation lasted nearly a minute. Patricia remained seated for perhaps the first time in years. She felt completely powerless. The remainder of the afternoon included discussion panels and networking sessions. One session focused specifically on community engagement and youth participation, given recent events in Maple Grove. Several attendees found the topic especially interesting. During the discussion, audience members were invited to submit questions. Most focused on improving programs and encouraging involvement. Then one question changed the atmosphere entirely. The question addressed the issue of adults attempting to exclude children from community activities based on personal disagreements. A moderator read it aloud. The room grew noticeably quieter. The topic resonated with many people. Unfortunately, it also struck remarkably close to home. The panel responded thoughtfully. Experts discussed fairness, administrators discussed transparency, community leaders discussed accountability. Every speaker emphasized the same principle: children should never become targets of adult conflicts. Policies must be applied equally. Opportunities should remain accessible. Personal grudges had no place in decisions affecting young people. The audience applauded. Several attendees exchanged meaningful glances. Among them were residents from Maple Grove, people who understood exactly why the discussion mattered. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. For the first time, she seemed aware that her actions might not appear as reasonable as she had imagined. Still, she refused to reconsider. Instead, she grew defensive, and defensiveness often leads people to make mistakes. That mistake came during an open networking session later that afternoon. Several community representatives gathered around a table discussing neighborhood concerns. Patricia joined the conversation. Initially, everything remained professional. Then the topic shifted toward youth programs. Without realizing how many people were listening, Patricia began describing what she viewed as problem children within her community. She referenced disruptions, behavior concerns, participation restrictions. The familiar narrative emerged once again. Only this time, something unexpected happened. People asked questions, specific questions. Questions requiring evidence. Questions requiring facts. Questions Patricia could not easily answer. One educator asked whether formal complaints existed. Another asked whether disciplinary records supported the allegations. A youth coordinator requested documentation. A community advocate asked whether the families involved had been given opportunities to respond. The conversation changed rapidly. For months, Patricia had operated in environments where accusations often went unchallenged. This audience was different. Professionals expected proof. Assumptions weren't enough. Rumors weren't enough. Personal opinions weren't enough. As questions accumulated, Patricia's explanations became increasingly inconsistent. Attendees noticed. Some exchanged concerned looks. Others quietly stepped away from the discussion. The confidence she had displayed earlier began disappearing. Meanwhile, Emily remained unaware of the specific conversation. She spent the afternoon meeting parents, speaking with educators, and discussing future initiatives. Her focus never wavered from helping students. That commitment did not go unnoticed by the end of the forum. Dozens of attendees had approached her with appreciation and support. The event concluded successfully, yet its most significant consequences would emerge afterward, because people had been watching, listening, comparing, evaluating, and many had reached conclusions. In the days following the forum, discussions spread throughout Maple Grove. Residents who attended shared observations. Stories circulated, perspectives shifted. For the first time, many neighbors viewed recent conflicts through a different lens. They began revisiting assumptions, examining facts, questioning narratives. The more they reflected, the clearer the situation became. Patricia's version of events contained significant gaps Emily's actions consistently reflected. Integrity. One relied on accusations, the other relied on evidence. One divided people, the other united them. The distinction became impossible to ignore soon. Several families who had previously remained silent began speaking openly. Parents shared experiences. Neighbors described encounters. Patterns emerged. What once appeared to be isolated incidents now looked remarkably connected. The growing awareness produced an unexpected result. People stopped being afraid. For years, many residents had tolerated Patricia's behavior because they believed resistance would create conflict. Now they understood something important. The conflict already existed. Silence had not prevented it. Silence had enabled it. As more voices emerged, Patricia found herself facing a situation she had never anticipated. Accountability. Not through revenge, not through public humiliation, through transparency. The very thing she had spent years avoiding. And unfortunately for Patricia, transparency tends to expose the truth. A special neighborhood association meeting was scheduled for the following month. Several policy proposals would be reviewed. Community concerns would be discussed. Attendance is expected to be unusually high. Patricia assumed it would be another routine meeting, another opportunity to assert control, another chance to dominate the conversation. She couldn't have been more mistaken, because many residents planned to attend for a different reason, not to listen, to speak. And when that meeting began, years of frustration would finally reach the surface. The woman who spent so long judging everyone else was about to discover what it felt like to be judged by her own actions. The reckoning she never expected was finally approaching. The neighborhood association meeting drew the largest crowd Maple Grove had seen in years. Residents arrived early. Parking spaces filled quickly. Every chair in the community center was occupied long before the meeting officially began. People stood along walls, families gathered in hallways. Even longtime residents who rarely attended neighborhood meetings made an effort to be there. Word had spread. Something important was about to happen. For years, many people had quietly tolerated behavior they disliked. They had remained silent to avoid conflict. They had convinced themselves that keeping peace was more important than speaking up. But eventually, silence reaches its limit, and Maple Grove had reached that limit. Patricia Reynolds entered the meeting with the same confidence she had displayed countless times before. She carried folders filled with notes. She greeted familiar faces. She settled into her usual seat near the front. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual, but something felt different. The atmosphere had changed. The room was polite, yet there was a noticeable shift. People were no longer looking at Patricia with deference. They were looking at her with scrutiny. Many had spent the previous weeks reflecting on recent events. Many had attended the Acuity Partnership Forum. Many had listened carefully, and many had reached conclusions that Patricia would soon find impossible to ignore. The meeting began routinely. Budget matters were discussed. Maintenance projects were reviewed. Committee reports were presented. Everything proceeded normally. Then the agenda reached community concerns. The room became noticeably quieter. Everyone knew this was the moment they had come for. Patricia was the first to speak, as always. She presented herself as a defender of neighborhood standards. She referenced community values. She discussed responsibility. She raised concerns about maintaining order. The speech sounded familiar, very familiar. Residents had heard variations of it for years in the past. Many would have nodded along. This time was different, because once Patricia finished speaking, other residents requested the floor, and unlike previous meetings, they weren't there to support her. They were there to share their experiences. One parent described how her son had been unfairly labeled after a minor misunderstanding. Another family explained how rumors about their children had spread through neighborhood groups. A retired teacher spoke about the importance of judging children fairly. A volunteer coordinator described repeated attempts to exclude certain families from community activities. The stories continued. Each one sounded slightly different, yet together they revealed a remarkably consistent pattern. Personal disagreements had been transformed into public campaigns. Assumptions had been presented as facts. Children had become targets. The room listened carefully. Patricia attempted to interrupt several times. For years, interruptions had helped her maintain control of conversations. This time, they didn't work. The meeting chair insisted that every resident be allowed to finish. And so they did. One by one, story after story, experience after experience, truth after truth. For perhaps the first time in her life, Patricia found herself unable to control the narrative. The facts were speaking for themselves. Then something unexpected happened. Mason and Lily's names were mentioned. Not as troublemakers, not as problems, as examples. Examples of children who had shown kindness despite being treated unfairly. Neighbors spoke about Mason helping younger children learn basketball. They spoke about Lily assisting elderly residents during community events. They described acts of kindness that Patricia had either ignored or dismissed. Emily listened quietly from the audience. As a mother, hearing those stories affected her deeply. The previous year had been painful. Watching her children become targets had broken her heart. Yet now, she was witnessing something powerful. The community was finally seeing them clearly, not through rumors, not through accusations, through reality. Patricia's expression grew increasingly tense. The image she had spent years creating was beginning to crumble. Not because anyone was attacking her, because people were telling the truth. And truth has a way of dismantling false narratives. Eventually, a resident asked a question that changed everything. The question was simple. Why had certain children been targeted repeatedly while others received endless excuses for similar behavior? The room fell silent. Everyone waited. Patricia attempted to provide an explanation, but after months of scrutiny, her reasoning sounded weak. The inconsistencies were obvious. The double standards were obvious. The bias was obvious. For the first time, many residents saw what had been hiding in plain sight. This had never been about community standards. It had been about control, and once people recognized that reality, they could not unsee it. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. When it finally concluded, several important decisions were made. New transparency. Measures would be implemented. Complaint procedures would require documentation, community. Committees would include broader representation. Most importantly, no individual would be allowed to exercise disproportionate influence without accountability. The changes were widely supported. Patricia opposed them, but for the first time, opposition didn't matter. The majority had spoken, and they wanted fairness. In the weeks that followed, the effects became visible throughout Maple Grove. The atmosphere gradually improved. Families, who once felt isolated, became involved again. Children returned to parks and activities. Community events experienced record participation. People felt welcome. People felt valued. People felt heard. The transformation wasn't dramatic. It reached steady, authentic, sustainable, exactly the kind of change Emily had always believed in. As for Patricia, she experienced a very different transformation. For years, she had relied on influence built through intimidation and social pressure. Now those tools no longer worked. Neighbors remained polite, but they were no longer willing to follow her lead. unquestioningly. Every claim required evidence. Every accusation required facts. Every proposal required transparency. In other words, Patricia was finally being held to the same standards she expected from everyone else. At first, she struggled with the adjustment. She complained. She blamed others. She portrayed herself as misunderstood, but gradually, she discovered something uncomfortable. Very few people were listening anymore. The authority she thought she possessed had never truly belonged to her. It had existed only because others remained silent. Once they found their voices, her influence faded. Meanwhile, Emily continued focusing on what mattered most: her family, her community, her work in education. She never sought revenge, never celebrated Patricia's downfall, never attempted to humiliate her. Because genuine leadership isn't about defeating opponents, it's about serving others. That difference explained everything. Months later, during a spring community festival, Emily watched Mason and Lily laughing with friends near the same park where the trouble had begun. The sight filled her with gratitude, not because life had become perfect, because justice had prevailed. The children were free to be children again, no longer burdened by unfair labels, no longer forced to defend themselves against adult conflicts, no longer carrying responsibilities that never should have been theirs. Nearby, neighbors chatted comfortably, families shared food, volunteers organized activities. The sense of community had returned, perhaps stronger than before, because adversity had taught people an important lesson. Communities aren't protected by those who seek control. They're protected by those who seek fairness. Emily reflected on everything that had happened: the accusations, the rumors, the meetings, the challenges. Looking back, she realized the outcome had never really been about titles, not even her role as school board chair. That title had surprised Patricia, but it wasn't what changed the situation. What changed the situation was character, integrity, patience, truth. Those qualities ultimately proved stronger than manipulation, stronger than gossip, stronger than fear. And that is why karma arrived, exactly when it did. Not as revenge, not as punishment, as consequence. The natural result of choices made over time. Patricia spent years trying to exclude children from a community. In the end, she became isolated by her own behavior. Emily spent years building trust and helping others. In the end, that trust protected her family. The contrast could not have been clearer, and the lesson could not have been more important. Those who use power to serve others create lasting respect. Those who use power to control others eventually lose it, because sooner or later, truth catches up with everyone. And when it does, character becomes impossible to hide. Maple Grove never forgot that lesson. Neither did Patricia Reynolds, and neither did the children whose kindness survived long enough for justice to find its way home.